Hello everyone, and welcome back to Isaiah for Mormons. Today we're going to be doing Isaiah chapter 20. It's only 6 verses, so it's not a very long section, but there is a lot of historical background, so it is going to take a little bit to explain. And this is a very odd chapter. This may be one of those chapters that you've read before and just said, really? What just happened? Right? That's sometimes what we get with Isaiah, and this is one of those. You really have to know a lot of cultural context to make sense of this chapter. One thing I wanted to bring up that's kind of funny, this is a total coincidence, happens to be Black History Month, and we happen to be talking about the Nubians. I didn't plan it that way, it just kind of worked out. It really ends up being more like Black History Year when you're talking about the book of Isaiah, because the Nubians are going to continue to come up over and over again. They remain important consistently through the entire book of Isaiah, so we're going to be continuously coming back to them. This is a good example of the idea that the book of Isaiah, appears to be thematically arranged. Last chapter, 19, we had a complete self-contained unit, the burden against Egypt. But then here we have this funny little endnote against Egypt, right? 6 verses. So what is this? Well, this appears to be actually at a different time, maybe, even than chapter 19, but it's about Egypt, and so the people putting this all together just stuck it in after 19, probably. So it's a little bit odd, and yeah, it doesn't make too much sense in the time period, but once again, thematically arranged, it makes sense. Well, we were talking about Egypt before, so let's put this in here with the other stuff about Egypt, I think is the idea. One thing also I wanted to bring up is it's obviously the parallels between our time and Isaiah's time are sometimes unsettling, and I think they're supposed to be. But I think part of what Isaiah wants us to realize is that we shouldn't give up hope about things. That, the world is kind of a crazy place. But the world has been a crazy place for a long time. The basics never change. If you repent, God will bless you, and things will be alright. If you don't, things will be less alright, and you will get the chastisements you need to incentivize you to repent. I feel like that's what we see over and over again in the Old Testament. I feel like that's what we see. Really, in some ways, that's what we see today. Sometimes bad things happen to us to help to bring us around. That's not the only explanation for why bad things happen. That's a conversation for another day. But that is definitely one consideration. And so when God says the Assyrians are the rod of my anger, sometimes God does indeed allow bad things to happen to help us to come around. But often, don't these things help us to come around? And when you look at the Book of Mormon, these guys would experience something really bad. The Lamanites, for example, would come up against them as sort of stirred up by dissenters from the Nephites, usually, right? And then, after kind of suffering for a while, usually they would repent. That's why it's so surprising when, at the end of the Book of Mormon, Mormon finds that they are not repenting, because they finally, at the very end, they break the pattern, and that's really in part why they get wiped out, right? So, and frankly, in the book of Isaiah, we see all these bad things happen to Judah, but kind of at the last minute, Judah does indeed repent, and things become better again. So I think that that's how we should look at this. I don't mean to be fatalistic with any of this stuff. That's not my intent, and I don't think Isaiah is fatalistic either. I think he says, "Listen, God's your only hope. If you repent and turn to Him, things will go well. So if and when we repent and return to God, things will go well for us." Yes, like I said, it can be unsettling to look at what is going on in the world and problems with other nations that we may be having, that many people are having in many parts of the world. We may want to look around and go, what's going on? Are we being punished? And I'm not sure we should look at it that way, to think that God's is in the process of wiping us out. I'm not so sure. God sometimes allows things to happen to us because it helps us to come around, and and I think that's what we see here. And yeah, I don't think we should be so um, be too concerned. I think Isaiah is supposed to give us hope to realize that this kind of thing has happened before. Yes, things get really hard, but God can save you. And I think that's one thing that we should think about as we go through this. So I just wanted to bring that up here at the beginning. So let's just jump right in here to chapter 20. Like I said, it's a short chapter, but it takes some historical context to make sense of. So let's just dive right into it here. Also, I almost forgot one sort of housekeeping item here. I recently got a new microphone, which is great because now you won't hear when I enthusiastically turn my head away from the computer when I'm talking. I have one strapped to my head now, but that does mean that this may sound like I'm in a little bit of a windstorm, so I'm going to try to fix that, but I may not be able to completely get it out. So I will, work on this. My audio is a little bit of a work in progress, but just forgive me for a week until I get it sorted out. Anyway, sorry about that. Let's just get into it here. So Isaiah chapter 20 reads, In the year that Tartan came unto Ashdod, and Sargon the king of Assyria sent him, and fought against Ashdod, and took it, at the same time spake the Lord by Isaiah the son of Amoz, saying, Go and loose the sackcloth from off thy loins, and put off thy shoe from off thy foot. And he did so, walking naked and barefoot. And the Lord said, Like as my servant Isaiah hath walked naked and barefoot 3 years for a sign and wonder upon Egypt and upon Ethiopia, so shall the king of Assyria lead away the Egyptians prisoners, and the Ethiopians captives young and old, naked and barefoot, even with their buttocks uncovered, to the shame of Egypt. And they shall be afraid and ashamed of Ethiopia their expectation, and of Egypt their glory. And the inhabitants of this isle shall say in that day, Behold, such is our expectation, whither we flee for help, to be delivered from the king of Assyria, and how shall we escape? So that's the whole chapter. Like I said, one of those chapters that you just think, what just happened, Isaiah? So let's just go through it briefly. So Tartan, in the year that Tartan came unto Ashdod. Tartan is maybe a name, but it might also just be a title for the guy who was sort of the right-hand man of Sargon II, the king, really the emperor of the Assyrian Empire. So the emperor of the Assyrian Empire, Sargon II, sends this guy Tartan to Ashdod, which is one of the cities of the Philistines, so that he could take it out. He appears to have done this after conquering a big force of sort of allied Assyrians. So the Assyrians fought through an alliance of various Syrian city-states, the Karkar Alliance. Throw that around in small social circles. They blew through this Karkar Alliance and got a hold of a whole bunch of cities, including Damascus, and then they blew down into Philistia, conquered Gaza, and apparently, according to Isaiah, Ashdod. And so during this period is when this is going on. This is probably somewhere around 720. He spends a little bit of time actually farther east after this. So he kind of does some stuff in the west in 720, and then Sargon II spends some time dealing with the Zagros Mountains all the way out in Iran. But during this period, we're just dealing with some kind of very basic things just out in the west. These little tiny city-states that have allied together. So he takes out the Karkar alliance of these Aramaeans, these Syrian city-states who have allied, and then he goes down and he takes out the Philistines, including Ashdod. So that's the background behind this. So then it says, At the same time spake the Lord by Isaiah the son of Amoz, saying, Go and loose the sackcloth from off thy loins, and put off thy shoe from thy foot. And he did so, walking naked and barefoot. Once again, this is one of those things where you look at it and you just go, what just happened, right? Now, it says that he's wearing sackcloth. Isaiah may, well, there may be actually a couple of reasons for this. It could be that he's wearing sackcloth as a sign of mourning, that he's been doing so for some time, kind of mourning for the wickedness of the people. That's a very real possibility. But it also could be that he's wearing sackcloth because that seems to have been fairly common at the time, as in making you instantly identifiable as a prophet. Might wear something like sackcloth. And people actually used to, at other periods, would would pretend to be prophets by wearing rough clothing. We get that from some other places, and so it is very possible that this is also what we're looking at. But his outer garments would be this sackcloth. So God says to Isaiah, "Go loose the sackcloth from your loins." So he may be well, and once again, we don't know exactly what this is. This may be his outer garment, um, but you would think that would be just take it off your back, right? Why does it say loose the sackcloth from off thy loins? This may be almost something like a loincloth, and put off thy shoes from thy foot. And he did so walking naked and barefoot. So some people have tried to kind of clean this up a little bit, make it look a little bit easier, but I don't think so. I mean, you have to understand the image that God is trying to paint. When people were taken into exile, they would be stripped and shaved and then hauled away as slaves to wherever they were needed. Wherever they were going to be sold. And this is what happens to people that are occupied by a foreign army in battle. They're stripped and shaved. They obviously don't have shoes, and they're taken away. So when it says loose the sackcloth from off thy loins, um, I I don't know how else to take that, but literally go be naked. You have no clothes on. Um, the word there really is loins. It's not like take clothes off your back. It's take off your loincloth and walk around naked. Um, and we just go, well, would God really tell the prophet to walk around naked? That seems kind of weird. Well, yeah, it would be really weird today. But at the time, this kind of symbolic action would have been immediately noticed, obviously. These days it would be immediately noticed by the police, and you would get arrested for indecent exposure, I think is the charge on that one. But at this time, people would immediately have noticed, and I think they probably would have gotten it. I think they would have immediately been aware that if he's walking around naked and barefoot under these circumstances, it's got to be because he's trying to show that exile is imminent. That would be the image brought to mind. And so that's what we get in the next verse. Well, and you have to say, why would God do that? Why would God ask somebody to do something that is not that is so weird, number one, but not even necessarily moral by today's standards. And I think that I think that's a good question. But we see this thing happen a lot, right? There are times where God does ask things that would indeed be immoral under other circumstances, right? That's and that's just the way it is sometimes. When God asks you to do it, it's the right thing to do. There are some things that are only right if God asks you to do it. Walking around naked is probably one of those things. So sometimes that's just the way it is. When God tells you to go in and kill every man, woman, and child in a city, that's obviously very difficult to do. But when God asks you to do it, they did it. In our own dispensation, when God asks you to, for example, have more than one family, plural families, which the brethren did in the early church, um, well, you do it, even if it seems very, very strange and indeed immoral to you. When God tells you to do it, you do it. But you better be dang sure God's telling you to do it, right? And this, Isaiah is a prophet. If I were to get the strange urge to walk around naked, as a sign, that would probably not be a good call. But when a prophet is given specific instructions to do something, even if it seems totally crazy, then, that's the right thing to do. So in verse 3 it says, "And the Lord said, Like as my servant Isaiah hath walked naked and barefoot 3 years for a sign and wonder upon Egypt and upon Ethiopia, so shall the king of Assyria lead away the Egyptians prisoners, and the Ethiopians captives, young and old, naked and barefoot, even with their buttocks uncovered, to the shame of Egypt." So Isaiah, now to say that he's walked around naked and barefoot for 3 years, I wonder if he was literally naked and barefoot for 3 years, or if this was something where he would come into town during the festivals, maybe, when he knew everyone would be there and do this, right? It's difficult to say. That would be one quite a sunburn, I would think, if you were doing this for 3 years. Difficult to say exactly what that is, but definitely it's a sign. It says a sign and wonder upon Egypt and Ethiopia, so clearly it's supposed to be a prophecy about what's going to happen to Ethiopia. It says so, Egypt and Ethiopia, right? So the Nubians and the Egyptians that are with the Nubians, right? Because the Nubians have conquered Egypt, creating this giant combined Upper and Lower Egyptian empire with Nubia now, because the Nubians have conquered it. So all of these areas are now combined into one giant combined, Egyptian Nubian empire. So this is a sign against those guys that just as Isaiah was naked and barefoot, just like slaves are when they go away into captivity, so the Nubians and the Egyptians will be taken away by the king of Assyria. They will all be taken prisoner, young, old, doesn't matter. Everybody's going to get taken away, and they're going to be naked and barefoot just like Isaiah was. And yes, obviously this is shameful, so the idea is they're going to be shamed in much the way that Isaiah was. Now, when does this happen? Right, that's the next question that comes to mind. When do the Assyrians come in and completely take out Egypt? This probably happens sometime after Isaiah's death. Isaiah may have died sometime around 690 BC, maybe into the 80s, probably somewhere around 690, maybe even earlier than that. The Assyrians don't conquer Egypt until 671. So, and at the time, this would have seemed a little bit crazy. It doesn't seem at this period like Egypt is ever going to fall to the Assyrians. Like I said before, the Nubians are the only ones really that can ever stand toe to toe with Egypt, and with the Assyrians, and they're able to do so for a while. So it's interesting that in the last chapter we talked about Isaiah prophesying the Nubians taking over Egypt, and now we see Isaiah prophesying that the Assyrians will take over the combined Nubian and Egyptian empire that we just saw created in the last chapter. So obviously there's a huge time lapse here. And prophetically there's a huge time lapse. Like I said, this doesn't happen until 671 BC. And the other obviously happened much earlier. So interesting to see, once again, kind of jumping around all over the place. But that's what we're looking at here. So sort of the shame of these people being taken away as slaves naked to Assyria. And it says, "And they shall be afraid and ashamed of Ethiopia their expectation, and of Egypt their glory." So presumably, this is the Israelites. When the Israelites see what Isaiah is doing and understand the meaning of it, um, well, when they realize that what Isaiah was talking about came true, that the Egyptians and the Nubians were indeed taken away by the Assyrians, they'll be afraid of the Assyrians and ashamed of Ethiopia their expectation and of Egypt their glory. They were expecting for Egypt and Ethiopia to save them, not for God to save them. So when this happens, everyone's going to realize, wait a second, the northern kingdom of Israel has been taken out. The Philistines have been taken out, which has just happened. That's the occasion of this prophecy, the Philistines being taken out. Because what happened is the Philistines got taken out, but there were some Egyptian troops that fought there, and even though they appear to have been defeated, I think people thought that there was sort of just enough pressure from the Egyptians that the Assyrians weren't able to continue pushing down through and conquer Judah and Egypt, and so there may have been some thought after this victory, this kind of lackluster victory against the Philistines that didn't end up becoming a victory against Egypt and Judah, that maybe they would be safe against the Assyrians because the Egyptians would come and help. And Isaiah is saying, that's not going to happen. The Egyptians and the Ethiopians are not going to help you. You're going to be afraid and ashamed of Ethiopia, your expectation, and of Egypt, your glory. You're going to realize that these guys are not going to help you after all because they can't. They're going to get taken into captivity. And the inhabitant of this isle shall say in that day after... Now, usually in that day is eschatological. In this case, it just seems to be when Ethiopia gets taken out. So they'll say in that day, behold, such is our expectation. Whither we flee for help to be delivered from the king of Assyria, and how shall we escape? This is kind of awkward, but the Septuagint clarifies this as them saying, if Egypt and Nubia got taken out by the Assyrians, how can we ever hope to escape? So the picture he's painting here is very interesting, that they had this kind of false confidence after the Assyrians came down and took out the Philistines and didn't seem to be able to do anything else. The Egyptians seemed to fight them to a standstill. But Isaiah is saying, no, the Assyrians are eventually going to take out Egypt, which they do eventually. And when that happens, you're going to ask yourself, if not even the Egyptians can permanently stand toe-to-toe with the Assyrians, how could we possibly escape? And the answer is, only if you turn to God. So that's really, I think, the message that he's trying to get across in this chapter, as in the other chapters. Like I said, this is a little bit of a strange chapter, but the idea, I think, is very clear. The only way they can possibly hope to avoid disaster is by turning to the Lord. He's the only one that can possibly save them. And I think today, as we go through the various problems that we have, I think we need to remember that too. God really is the only one that can save us. So that's chapter 20. We'll be getting back to some more burdens next time. So we will see you guys next time.